Váyanse al carajo, yanquis de mierda, que aquí hay un pueblo digno. Aquí hay un pueblo digno, yanquis de mierda. Váyanse al carajo 100 veces. Aquí estamos, los hijos de Bolívar, los hijos de Guaycaipuro, los hijos de Tupac Amaru. Y estamos resueltos a ser libres. Hago responsable de todo esto y lo que pueda ocurrir al gobierno de Estados Unidos, que anda detrás de todas las conspiraciones contra nuestros pueblos. Nosotros, yanquis de mierda, sépanlo, estamos resueltos a ser libres. Pase lo que pase y cuéstenos lo que nos cueste. Ya basta de tanta mierda de ustedes, yanquis. Ya basta. Ojalá, como dicen nuestros hermanos los árabes, ojalá, inshallah, salam aleikum, ojalá que algún día el pueblo de los Estados Unidos tenga un gobierno con el que se pueda conversar. Ojalá algún día pronto, más pronto que tarde, ese país tenga un gobierno que respete a los pueblos y los gobiernos de América Latina. No le pedimos más nada, que nos respeten, porque nosotros merecemos respeto. Y yo, pues espero, no le voy a pedir a los demás gobiernos que hagan lo mismo que nosotros hacemos, no. Cada quien es libre. Pero vaya, el día que nosotros, todos los suramericanos, cantemos como un solo gallo, nos respetarán. Nos respetarán. Ahí está el secreto. El día que hablemos con una sola voz, nos respetarán los poderosos del mundo. Nos han tenido divididos y cada quien defendiendo sus propios intereses. Nosotros no. Nosotros defendemos y defenderemos la dignidad de nuestros pueblos hasta las últimas consecuencias. Pero las amenazas andan por todos lados. Por eso, ojo pelado, mucha unidad, mucha conciencia, mucha movilización. El pueblo tiene que estar en la calle. Ese es el mejor seguro contra el golpe o contra cualquier otra amenaza de la cuarta flota. Pero no les tenemos miedo.
What's good, everybody? This is Ramiro from ANTICONQUISTA. Powerful words from Comandante Hugo Chavez, one of the realest revolutionaries out there. He is the former president of Venezuela who was laying down the law, telling the imperialist Yankees, the U.S. government, to stay the hell out of Latin America, to stay home, stop fucking with our countries, stop destroying our revolutions. And it's one of his best speeches. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Again, my name is Ramiro. I'm one of the co-editors of ANTICONQUISTA. And today we have the great comrade, another fellow Latino Marxist-Leninist communist. Shout out to Bay Area 451 out in Cali. I'm out here in LA. He's up there in the Bay Area. And we're chilling out here talking about Joe Biden, Latin America, and intersectional imperialism. How's it going out there in the Bay, comrade?
Oh man, it's going. But let me tell you, what a way to start a live stream, man. Oh, got the blood pumping and everything. That's really good. You know, everything's cool out here. We just have been pretty busy ever since we got this studio up and running. But I know that there's been a lot going on this month as well, you know, because Biden just got over the riots, the Capitol riots. You know, California's kind of in its own somewhat liberal bubble, you know. But hopefully that bubble will burst pretty soon, and we'll be seeing some more action when Biden slips up with his, good old American imperialism. So.
Yeah, most definitely. And we definitely know the Democrats will be carrying out the interests of US imperialism with a new face, with a new agenda. I think I'm so glad to be able to have you on to talk with us, because I think it's something that we have to discuss as Latinos, as communists, as revolutionaries, because a lot of the mainstream media out there is so hype about Biden as president. They're saying, oh my God, it's the most diverse cabinet. Oh my God, it's progressive. And he had this show and performance at the inauguration with a very carefully curated and selected group of people from different identities. And while on the one hand, as communists, we support the empowerment of oppressed nationalities, of oppressed genders, of oppressed peoples, 100%. However, we understand that the only way to achieve a true liberation for Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, persons with disabilities, anybody who's been marginalized, is through socialism, through getting rid of the two-party imperialist capitalist system that's based on slavery, based on colonialism. And I'm glad to have you, because we're on the same page. Unfortunately, a lot of Latinos that I've spoken with, even here in LA and in general, they're like, well, this is a time to celebrate. Like, we have to be happy for progress. Representation matters. And I'm just like, no, this is representation in a shitty imperialist system that oppresses Latinos, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to get into today, talking about first, like, debunking this quote unquote intersectional imperialism that is just imperialism with another face, a more liberal face. And then I'm hoping we can get into talking about Biden and what his administration means for our sisters and brothers in Latin America. I'm a big fan of the videos that you do in defense of Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia. I know you've been pretty active. So why don't, before we get into today's topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've done on your YouTube channel to expose imperialism and capitalism?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I really love the work that you all do as well. And, I first started off on online communities, basically where ambiguous leftists and everybody would hang out. And I actually got my start defending Venezuela and their election processes and whatnot, and seeing the type of playbook the CIA has been playing in Latin America and kind of mimicking that all over the world, whether it's, for example, Hong Kong or Belarus or, other nations that are against the U.S. imperialism. And, I usually I really focus on China. I think they are really important to the socialist movement in understanding, but I also, I have, obviously being a Latino, Latin America is very close to me. Watching Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Chile, and other Central and South American countries has been really pretty interesting. This, these these years, and better futures to come as well. For I hope, but I feel and I hope as well. Today we just released a video on Deng Xiaoping, understanding what he was going through with the Chinese conditions over there and why he implemented his opening up and reform. We're hoping that we can do actually a video on Bolivia and Venezuela soon, more about Mas and Evo Morales and what they went through during their coup, and also Hugo Chavez and what was Venezuela like before and after he came into power. I always plug this in for Venezuela, though. If you all haven't watched the Revolution Will Not Be Televised, that documentary on how literally the people were camped out of the presidential palace, pushing out those rats that attempted the coup and ultimately failed. It was just such an inspirational sort of film and documentary about that. Highly recommend if you want to get a good intro on what Venezuela was going through.
It's funny you mentioned that documentary, because it's actually one of the documentaries that really inspired me and really moved me toward understanding socialism and communism. I started becoming more of a socialist and communist in 2009 after the U.S. coup in Honduras. My family's from Honduras, and seeing the impact of the removal of Zelaya, how much the people loved him. And he wasn't perfect, but for the conditions for a country like Honduras that had been under so many right-wing military dictatorships for such a long time, to have somebody remotely on the left was very inspiring. And seeing Hugo Chavez, his speeches in solidarity with the people of Honduras, that really inspired me to learn more about Latin America, Bolivarianism, Chavismo, and then from there, socialism, from there, Marxism, Leninism, and even today, 21st century socialism. And I'm glad that you produce the content that you do, because the stuff that we're putting out is not super popular with a lot of the ultra left or crowd people who believe that China is horrible, that they perpetuate this myth that China is imperialist, that it's a colony of, that's colonizing Latin America. And even within Latin America, that unfortunately exists to some degree. Some ultra left parties espouse that line, when in reality, it's been a relationship of win-win cooperation. We can't even begin to talk about the strength of ALBA and the Bolivarian alliance without talking about solidarity from China, Russia, and Iran as well. And so I'm glad that you produce the content that you do, because it's something that, with some of the more angsty crowd of anarchists who are like, China's horrible and evil, it's not the most popular, but you still put it out there because it's the truth. And so I think it's something that's really, really great. What I want to do is I want to show you an article that I saw. Well, first, you know what? Let me just ask you this. What do you think about Joe Biden, Kamala Harris coming into power in the US, their inauguration, and what do you think, what kind of impact do you think it's going to have on the United States?
Oh, it's been great. It's been fantastic. What a victory for, all those people. It's saved our democracy, blah, blah, blah. No, I mean, come on. It's still, terrible. I know I've been really pushing back on a lot of people that say that it's semi-better and everything like that, too, because it's very frustrating that they still don't understand what our communities are going to here at home and abroad. It's just I don't really care about Kamala Harris that put more of my black and brown people in prison more than any other attorney general out here in California, and I don't care about Joe Biden, who's is calling continuously to call Cuba, Venezuela, and everything else dictatorships, authoritarian governments and whatnot. It's still the same. And that's why we say, there will be really no difference between Trump and Biden in those sort of respects. Not to go off too much of a tangent, but like day two, Biden sent more troops to Syria, and he's continuing his empire, the U.S. empire over there. And with all that said, it's just like, okay, any day now, we're going to get our vaccines, we're going to get our welfare, or a compromise with our, education or healthcare or debt relief. Yet 2 days into his presidency, he can send troops to another country to preserve. He sent those troops to the oil fields in Syria, the Kurdish-led or the Kurdish-controlled areas in Syria to protect the oil fields. It's just, what else is new? And to anybody who says, oh, Trump, Trump, we can push him left, we can try to save face, we can do anything. No, it's protecting the establishment, it's protecting the capitalists that control. And that's why our voices right now is super important, to expose that hypocrisy and expose everything that we need to do. And I'm glad we're talking about this diverse cabinet BS as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great explanation, and the fact that people unfortunately dictate politics based on just words and terminology. And sure, Biden is saying some nice sounding things about empowering Black and brown people and LGBTQ people, but ultimately, it's like you said, it's not changing the fundamental system of capitalism, of imperialism. He's still supporting troops abroad. He still wants to invade other countries. just with a different face. And so I saw this article for people, everybody listening to this as a podcast as well. I'll read some of it. This is exactly the narrative that we're getting in mainstream media about Biden, about Kamala, like you said, which she definitely is a cop. She definitely is somebody who supports the state of Israel, the private prisons. And so I just wanted to read some of this because it's just disgusting, and it's all we're seeing in mainstream media. Vice President Kamala Harris. Harris is probably the best known face in the administration after Biden himself. Her mother is from India and her father is from Jamaica, making her the first Black woman and Asian American woman elected to the post. Harris has made it a goal to fight climate change together with the new president. With her in the picture is Doug Emhoff, the first second gentleman in U.S. history. For me, Kamala Harris is somebody who represents the epitome of intersectional imperialism, because even though she's from two oppressed nationalities, I mean, you talk about Jamaica and India, and they've been so victimized to U.S. colonialism, British colonialism and imperialism especially. And, you know, it's just like somebody like her, even though she's of that background, she still very much represents the same corporate interests that colonized her countries to begin with, the same banks, the same insurance companies, the same prison and military industrial complex organizations. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. She is just she's been assimilated to capture the interests of capital and capitalists here, and to even say that her diversity would be really important. I mean, it was just so frustrating to see people who you thought were left on Twitter, like what's his name? Sean, for example, Sean, the writer or the journalist, I forget his last name, but he immediately backed this administration. It's like, yeah, this doesn't interest our people. This doesn't. In reality, when you're backing the military-industrial complex, nothing is going to change of that sort. We need to push our movement outside of this notion of democracy and whatnot, simply because of what Kamala Harris represents, and all these cabinet picks as well. It's awful to see how many are backed by Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and all these billion-dollar industries that are just going to keep growing and growing and growing until there's a ultimate conflict that I'm fearing is going to happen. But I know that it's going to be at the cost of the people here, especially our Black and brown communities.
Most definitely. And shout out to everybody in the chat, by the way. Yamir said multicultural liberal imperialism. That's exactly right. Shout out to Luis Salazar. Shout out to Luis Enriquez and everybody in the chat. And Rufus Hummingbird mentioned Raytheon. A few people were mentioning this guy who I have on the screen right now. I wanted to ask you in particular about him. He's somebody that's interesting. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. If confirmed, Austin 67, a retired four-star general, will be the first Black person to head the Pentagon. Because he has so recently been an active military officer, he would require a congressional waiver to be confirmed. Austin held a series of prominent roles in the U.S. Army and worked with Obama during the withdrawal from Iraq.
What withdrawal? What are you talking about?
Right.
I mean, we still have bases out there. We still have so much. And he's the guy that's behind all those or helping out Obama with all those drone strikes. I really wonder. And that's probably the most concerning with me about Biden and, Lloyd as well. It's just like, what's going to happen with the drone strikes? Did we ever fix that with Trump? Did we ever fix? No, we didn't. Of course we didn't. There's the extrajudicial killing. I was actually watching this on Twitter unfold. There was this person that say, "Oh my God, Obama's going to donate 90% of his income to charity. Look, Google Obama 90%," and it's actually, some really bad stuff. Like Obama 90% basically means that of all the drone strikes that he initiated, 90% of them killed people that were unintentional, that actually killed innocent people. 90%. the awful, and this is what imperialism does. It just doesn't care about our people. And whether we continue our war in Syria, whether we try to sabotage more of Iran, Venezuela, and everyone else, and that's going to escalate on its own, who knows? And with people lined up like this guy, it's not going to be surprising how bad things may get under Biden.
Yeah, and it's pretty insane because, with Lloyd Austin, I think, his example is interesting as well because he is also connected to Raytheon. I think he had some major investments in Raytheon, if I'm not mistaken. And Raytheon is one of the biggest military. Yeah, it's one of the biggest military industrial complex organizations. He's profiting from it, and he's profiting from war. But even though, like, in appearance, right, he's black and he's somebody who comes from an oppressed nationality, the liberals try to use that as a disguise to further advance their imperialist propaganda and their imperialist maneuvers. And I'm glad you mentioned Obama because as president, as a Democrat, and as a black man, he expanded AFRICOM more than any other president. He expanded, drone strikes in Africa, like you mentioned, and across the Middle East and South Asia. And his identity was used as a cover and as a way to hide from it. I think also recently the Department of Homeland Security is like some right-wing Cuban gusano who's like, anti-Castro, surprisingly. And that's another interesting dynamic too, because it's like, on paper, he's like, okay, he's Latino, but then in reality, it's this white settler Cuban gusano who's overseeing the locking up of black and brown indigenous people from mainly Mesoamerica. And, so it's just the interesting class dynamic that
they're traitors for their own benefit. They really betray our community, our class, and everything else just so they can have the cozy seat thinking. And here's the worst part about, liberal identity politics. These people think they're being good representatives of their community when they're not. They're really actually betraying our interest, and nobody in our communities should be looking up to these people because, liberal ID poll really poisons what we go through. We always say that if you're a cop, prosecutor, landlord, you're a class traitor. But, no matter what, too, if you're in the military industrial complex we're lining up the traitors or the betrayers of our community right here in this cabinet. And I'm really... it's just a great example of how, we're in the presidency. I'll always remember, I forget who said this. It was in a conference with Cornel West, but he basically say, our people can sit at the table, but we know around the table is mostly the white capital industry that dictates what we do, what that table does, what those people do. So the power is not being in the seat, it's those that are around us and those that influence. And I just really, even, like I said, even if you have a CEO in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, they are still going to be pushing the interests of capital, and it's that pervasive. Don't trust the diversity that is happening here because you're obviously seeing you're going to see how terrible the agenda they're pursuing around the world.
Yeah, for sure. And even this is the guy we were talking about earlier, Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. The Cuban American headed the Citizenship and Immigration Services under Obama. He led the implementation of the DACA program that allowed so-called dreamers who were brought to the U.S., quote unquote, illegally as children to stay in the country. If confirmed, he would be the first immigrant and Hispanic to head the Department of Homeland Security. And just shit like that, it's like, okay, this guy is clearly a whiter guy from Cuba who his family probably owned like a few enslaved people in Cuba back in the day and probably was involved in some really sketchy shit in Cuba before the revolution. And we're placing his appointment to lock up black and brown people as some sort of celebration. And it's just
Surprise, surprise. A Gusano who probably says, Castro took away my grandparents' plantation, freed my slaves, sort of, Gusano. It's just, don't get me started on Marco Rubio and, little Havana Cubanos as well. They're just so frustrating to see, how I just seen this meme. It's really, America is just so anti-immigrant that they have immigrants becoming anti-immigrant, like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and all these other immigrants. And in reality, how Cubans in America are just continuing to betray their own, our Latin community as a whole as well. Don't get me started on that. But, going back to this, it's obviously a sort of pandering. They're now really moving towards this. Democrats are really trying to move towards this centrist approach, trying to bridge between moderate Republicans and Democrats. But the thing is that Democrats have moved so far right that you're bridging. You're not really bridging anything except Republican values or rightist values. And granted, it's not as bad as the fascistic sort of foundations that Trumpism and everything else was laying before. But at the same time, you're only justifying and solidifying those types of inclinations as well. You're not actually changing anything just because you put in a few diverse people. It's all a facade. It's all just hype to appease the sort of white liberal that thinks that's good. But and even some of our people who are liberal thinking that that's good. But in reality, our interests are never going to be met under these people.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just, I think it's well said, man. And I think the way you explained it is really good as well, because I think that people have to understand that identity is not the basis of everything. Class, as communists, right, we have a class analysis that even though we are Latino, we have roots in Latin America and the Caribbean, we also are against Latinos and Latin American people who are against our class interests, who are part of the capitalist imperialist class, who support the overthrow of leftist governments and who extract resources from our countries. And this is something that I think we're going to see more under Biden and Kamala. I think that we're going to see a more color revolution style approach to regime change, because under Trump and the Republicans, it's really important to understand the class dynamics of who supports what wing of the imperialists, right? You have the Democrats who have the NGOs, Silicon Valley, social media, and they're going to clamp down. First of all, who knows if our conversation right now in the future may not even be possible, because they run that shit, like YouTube, Google, they run all this. And even having these conversations where we're critiquing the Democrats, like who knows if we'll be able to do this. And they're going to censor the left more, because like one thing that I found interesting was that with the Capitol riot, the insurrection, there was all these mainstream media liberal articles allied with the Democrats that were saying like the dangerous role of conspiracy theories in the Capitol riot. And so now people like us who are saying that, the U.S. has been trying to overthrow Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua, and that the U.S. has these imperialist campaigns abroad, we may be considered quote unquote conspiracy theorists, and they'll try to censor us, and it's just interesting because I saw a lot of people on the left who were like cheering on the censorship of people on the right. I'm like, dude, they're going to use that same shit against us. Like pretty soon, we're not going to be able to be talking like the way we are now, because they're going to call us conspiracy theorists for opposing liberal imperialism.
Yep. I mean, the thing is, and that's the frustrating thing about liberals too, they believe in this sort of horseshoe theory, that the end of these horseshoes are radicals that believe in, I can't tell the difference between a guy who wants to kill black and brown people and somebody who's fighting against that. They can't tell the difference between them. And if that was the case, who knows if movements like BLM during the George Floyd sort of riots and rebellions and movements would have taken off, and that was significant in, the discourse, at least for the left. But, ultimately we can see that didn't really lead anywhere, other than making them making a major point in history, but at the same time still being stagnant with the process that needed to happen during these riots. And ultimately, when you have this power in social media and whatnot, it's just super important to tread carefully. And it's really unfortunate that when we want to make this our life, when we want to make these platforms a super important sort of discussion for these ideas and whatnot, we're lumped in with the racists, the fascists, the bigots, and everything else. And when they're literally censoring fascist and anti-fascists, and like we literally said, if only there was a movement that would stop the fascists. And when we had, at least the left as a whole had Antifa, trying to disrupt those. Antifa did a lot of work in disrupting those sort of fascist cells or those racist cells in infiltration and exposing and all these sorts of things. But you're silencing them because they may be violent. Like AOC says, you being so violent with saying the word fuck or anything like that. I mean, it's just so frustrating that the liberals are now silencing the very movements that that we're supposed to really push for our progress in our communities. I wouldn't say, but like seeing AOC really betray our community more and more, especially with not fighting for healthcare, not fighting for the things that we need right now. And it's just super frustrating that we're still seeing how the system swallows up people that may have good intentions and everything, but at the same time, as communists, we all know why. There's no way these institutions are going to allow, actual change for the people to happen. So, I mean, and it's very adaptable. We can actually see how capitalism adapts to, okay, we'll allow your people in, we'll allow everybody in, except they're gonna have to play by our agenda, they're gonna have to play by our rules, and if you don't, we're gonna silence you either through social media or worse, and especially if you're abroad, we're gonna silence you even harder, and I'll let me say this, this is all just a continuation of like the banana republics, where they would empower a select few on top, whereas 90% or over 90% of the bottom would just be enslaved by them. It's just whether it's a pyramid scheme over there or over here, we're always kind of bumbling around trying to fight back against this Monroe Doctrine. As John Bolton said, the Monroe Doctrine is still alive and well. Here in 2000, in the year 2000, it was I think it was 2018. He said that, and that's a extremely outdated imperialist document that oppresses. It's more than outdated. It's horrendous. Taking away a country's sovereignty for the bidding of the United States. In this notion that it was supposed to protect against European powers infiltrating, but in reality, it's doing our agendas or our American agenda. But enough said. That's my sort of rant on that.
Well said, comrade. I mean, it's just crazy how much people fall for it. And I feel like the Democrats, like you said, capitalism and imperialism are extremely adaptable. It knows how to adapt, how to change, how to incorporate people in the outfield. I feel like the Democrats are kind of like the exhaust pipe of the U.S. empire, where they recognize real problems, but they control them and funnel them in a way that still keeps you, they're like, they use like militant language, but they're using the same methods. They're like, we need to change the system. We need to overthrow the elites. We need to get rid of the rich. And that's why we need to go out and vote. I'm just like, my dude, we haven't been able to change anything through voting in mad long. So I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Exactly.
Like, we need a revolution. We need a complete change of the system. And going on to, well, I'm glad you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine and how it's still alive today and U.S. imperialism, because there's this important article, that recently came out that talks about, Biden will recognize Guaido as Venezuela's leader, top diplomat says. And so I just want to read through it. And for people who are listening, from Reuters, this is from January 19th, so a few days ago. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's administration will continue to recognize Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the South American country's president. Anthony Blinken, Biden's nominee for Secretary of State, said on Tuesday. Blinken told members of the U.S. Senate that Biden would seek to, quote, more effectively target sanctions on the country, which aim to oust President Nicolás Maduro, who retains control of the country. Blinken said the new administration would look at more humanitarian assistance to the country. So they're telling you right here, one paragraph, they're like, we're going to more effectively target sanctions on the country. And then they're like, oh, we're going to look at more humanitarian assistance. And it's just like complete bullshit, And so it says the U.S., along with dozens of other countries, recognize Guaido, the leader of Venezuela's opposition-held National Assembly, as the country's president in 2019, arguing Maduro's 2018 re-election was rigged, which is complete bullshit. Guaido's push to oust Maduro, who has overseen a collapse in the once prosperous OPEC nation's economy and stands accused of corruption and human rights violations, has stalled. I love how they just add that. Like, they can't just say Guaido's push to oust Maduro has stalled. No, it's like Guaido's push to oust Maduro, who, by the way, is rude as fuck, does this and that, hates babies, drinks baby blood. They're just like creating this narrative of like, because you can't read that and be like, okay, like walk away with. So I don't know. What do you think, first of all, about this, the fact that Biden is going to recognize Guaido, or is planning to at least, and how mainstream media is just totally missing the ball? Because we're not seeing, I'm surprised this article even came out, because like these are the kind of headlines that are more hidden in mainstream news. All we're seeing are like the ones we were looking at before, like historic appointment of Black and indigenous people, and and it's just like, this is the shit that we should be looking at, and no one's talking about it. But I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, it shows how detached the United States is with reality and the way the world is moving right now. I always say, and I noticed this very interesting trend where Republicans do outrageous shit, and then when Democrats come in, they keep that outrageous shit. They don't actually change these horrendous policies, these foreign policies that Republicans put in, like they're going to keep the embassy in Israel, or Jerusalem. They're going to keep the embassy in Jerusalem, or like they're not going to recognize Maduro still, and all these frustrating sorts of setbacks for the people over there. And it really, when I was looking at Bolivia, and when Mas won the elections, and how the Venezuela ambassador came back into his office and put Juan Guaido's picture on the ground, and it was just a symbolic, such a heart-fluttering sort of moment where we all know where Venezuela is going to fight tooth and nail against the United States and whatever their imperialism throws at them. Not to go on the tangent, but to see Cuba as well, when the United States put back the sanctions, and looking at their endured toughness, saying, all right, here we go again, let's do it, and it's like, no, this isn't gonna, we know this shit. It's not our government's fault. It's your fault. It's the United States' fault. Sanctions hurt us because the United States is dictating the global capitalist market, and by trying to get Juan Guaido, and like we see in this article, U.S. terrorism sponsor list, which I am just baffled by, and everything else. It's just complete nonsense.
That's a great point about the Democrats not really changing anything once they get into office, because it's true. It happens time and time again where they promise they're going to be more progressive, blah, 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 and they just keep maintaining the same imperialist regime change operations. And here, the article we're looking at is Cuba placed back on U.S. terrorism sponsor list. This is from January 11th. So again, this is still technically under Trump. But I would bet and wager, and I bet you would say the same, comrade, that this is probably going to stay the same, or they're still going to try regime change against Cuba, but just in a different light. And so this article is telling us Trump's administration made the announcement just days before he leaves the White House. President-elect Joe Biden, who takes office on January 20th, has previously said he wants to improve U.S.-Cuban relations. Cuba called the move, quote, political opportunism. Biden said he is seeking closer ties between the long-term adversaries, but Mr. Trump's decision is likely to hinder a quick repair of relations. And so what I think is interesting about that, it's like, what's interesting is the fact that the U.S. still, no matter what, wants to overthrow the Cuban government, right? They don't want a socialist country like Cuba to be in their domain of control. And the approach is going to be different. I think the approach, whereas Trump and the Republicans really embodied that hardline Gusano crowd, that platform, because that was a big part of his base too, the Gusanos in Florida and New Jersey as well. You know, they were all about like paramilitaries and direct force and strength. I think Biden and the Democrats are going to be like, wait a minute, let's be like the Godfather here. If y'all are fans of The Godfather, I'm a big fan of The Godfather. I don't know if y'all seen it, but The Godfather, there's that famous quote where he says, you know, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And I think that's really the technique that the liberal U.S. imperialists in the Democratic Party really use against our countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that are standing up against imperialism. Because, for example, in Cuba, you have the National Endowment for Democracy and other NGOs funding underground hip hop movements in Cuba to be like, look at these cool rappers resisting the Cuban dictatorship, you know, and trying to portray them as like these hipster I call it like hipster imperialism, you know what I'm saying? And that's going to be the new strategy. What do you think against Cuba?
I think it's very interesting what Trump did when he obviously Republicans are trying to pull as much fast shit as they can before they leave the White House. And here's my hope, and I am optimistic about this, let's say, because I know what playbooks that they may say. You know, they may keep Cuba on the terrorist sponsor list and whatnot, even though I have no idea what terrorists they are sponsoring compared
Right.
to the United States. Like they call their their medical, sending their doctors around the world forced labor, when it's just flat out false. They do so much good work over there, and I think I did this in one of my reviews of the documentaries on Cuba, that those doctors that were forced out of Brazil because of this ludicrous notion, they left, like, I think, what was it, 70% of the poor without a doctor. It was just so, during a crisis, during the COVID crisis. But here was my point. So I noticed when Obama was trying to repair the relations with countries like Cuba and trying to open markets and things like that, it was a sort of, we were all kind of taken aback and saying, okay, what's going to happen here? What's going on? You know, even the Cuban documentary that I was watching on one of my React channels, I noticed that there was a sort of liberal taint that they were going about, because they were kind of praising Obama in opening up those markets. And I have to say that liberals aren't that smart. Liberals don't know what they're sort of doing when they're opening up these markets, because when I look at China and how they utilize the markets for the people, for example, and when the United States is trying to lax their regulations and embargo to open up more in Cuba, it was a kind of concern. It's like, okay, for the first time, the Cuban Constitution recognizes private property. There's all this capital being built up and everything like that. Is that concern for, communists, Cuban communists? And obviously, of course not. It's, as long as the party is still in power and as long as they are in control with the dictatorship of the proletariat and whatnot, they're going to use these markets to generate the wealth that they need to push forward with the revolution transition. So I am hoping that Biden does do what Obama does for the sake of whatever they're trying to chase and lax the embargo. But forewarning the rest of the world, don't take that as, oh, America is finally changing. No, because once we get a Republican back in, it's back to the same. Don't trust anything what the United States is doing right now, and it's just frustrating to see how nothing can be relied on foreign policy wise with trying to make peace. Trying to make peace with these countries. And I agree with Cuba. It's political opportunism, because you're just trying to get brownie points instead of actually thinking about our people and thinking about what these embargoes, what this maltreatment is doing against our people. But I would say, for the time being, if Cuba can take advantage of opening up relations under a Biden administration, economic relations, go for it, with this notion that they're going to be taken away pretty soon, and let's generate as much wealth as we can while it's open, and and just go from there. Unfortunately, I wouldn't blame Cuba saying, forget you guys, we're not doing this anymore, we're going on our own. And I'll respect that as well.
Yeah, and it's even happening with Nicaragua too. The article we're looking at now, U.S. slapped sanctions on more top Nicaraguan officials. And this is the trio that Bolton, who was the Secretary of State before, referred to as a, quote, troika of tyranny, which I think is pretty badass, actually. And I shout out to Troika Collective, our comrades who also share stuff. They actually took on that name as a sort of slap in the face back to Bolton and the empire, which I think is pretty dope. But again, in the last days of Trump's presidency, and I'm sure Biden has not indicated any change in this, U.S. Treasury Department slapped sanctions on Nicaragua's Attorney General, the U.S.-born private secretary to President Daniel Ortega, and a savings and loan business. The U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control said the sanction decision, quote, targets corrupt financial operations and Ortega regime supporters, unquote. The move blocks the U.S. assets of the officials and prohibits U.S. citizens from dealing with them. And so all this is like a pretty big deal. Like people, like we always talk about this, right? Like sanctions, they're not just words. Like this is a big deal, especially for small countries like Nicaragua, like Cuba, like Venezuela. When you're sanctioned by the U.S. and the U.S. is saying, if anybody trades with them, like you're fucked too. We're going to go after you. Like that's a big deal, because then it's kind of like in a microcosm, right? Imagine if out of nowhere, everyone's like, yo, Bay Area 415. Bay Area 415 is the terrorist. So that means T-Mobile, if you provide service to Bay Area 415, you're supporting terrorism. Chase Bank, if you allow Bay Area 415 to bank with you, you're supporting terrorism. So now all of a sudden your phone's cut off. You can't even get your cash out of your bank account, and you still got bills to pay. You still got your rent to pay, and you're not able to get money coming in from anywhere. That's sort of a microcosm example of what sanctions do to a country in the global South. And it's important to really recognize that, because I think a lot of people in the first world, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure.
We've seen a lot of people who are ultra left, whether they're Maoists, Trotskyists, or anarchists or whatever, who they will support the regime change against Maduro, against Ortega, against Cuba, and they'll be like, they're not real socialists. They've betrayed their people. They're, revisionist capitalists. So we need to support this organic collective of opposition people. What is your response to people who think like that?
We are supposed to analyze history through a Marxist lens. We have historical materialism as the basis of that. So the biggest example of this was when the Soviet Union fell and the shock doctrine was put in place in the Eastern Bloc and Russia, and how terrible life was afterwards, and is still terrible for some of those countries as well. It's incredible that you can have leftists that would cheer on such downfalls just so they can bolster their point, saying, see, it didn't work. See, it didn't defend, and they didn't defend the people. And thus, it's either they're applauding that it failed, or they're just using it as an example to show why it failed, because they didn't follow their Trotskyist ideals or their ultra ideals. It's absolute, and it's so detached from reality, because you're actually cheering on the suffering of people you're trying to help. I remember when Evo Morales was ousted in Bolivia, and there was a whole bunch of anarchists saying, "Oh yeah, that's good," And it's like, you're literally cheering on fascists to take hold of the government. You're literally like the people, the most vulnerable people, the indigenous people. I don't know, hundreds are massacred under Juan's sort of regime, and to say that she was better, or saying, well, look at what happened at the aftermath, when you don't have somebody that is doing a protracted people's war or whatever. It's like, why are you cheering this?
Right.
Why? Like, it's not appropriate. Like, bring back Moss. I know Moss, it does go against this notion of our Marxist-Leninist notion, obviously, that revolution needs to happen to overthrow the capitalist system and whatnot. And that's why I've been looking at Venezuela and Bolivia with a keen eye. It's like, a revolution hasn't happened yet, but they're onto something here, whether it's their elections or anything. And places like Nepal, for example, that voted in their communist party, and unfortunately, they're having friction right now between the Maoist and the ML sort of factions. But ultimately, it's very interesting to see these sorts of developments in the Marxist-Leninist world happen. And I'm really happy that we're more realistic with these sorts of approaches, saying, yeah, we're ready to pick up whatever we need to pick up, whether it's the ballot or something else. And I obviously can't say, but at the same time, we're all for peaceful means. But if push comes to shove, we'll be ready for anything to fight for the people. And to say that we don't have the correct government, and here's why, with ignoring the litany of economic and military warfare interventions that the West places on these places, it just goes back to show where their interests lie. Their interest lies more on ideological goals, rather than material reality to help people trying to go. And I get it, this isn't, but we all have to understand, this isn't a liberal sort of notion as, oh, if we get healthcare, we'll be okay. If we get universal free education, everything's going to be good for the people. It's like, no, we're not fighting for that either. We know what our ideology stands for, and what it takes to really put power in the hands of the workers and the people. But at the same time, we're not running off to vote for Democrats either. We're not off voting for Joe Biden either. And, the whole discussion here is on that as well. But at the same time, when we actually have leaders like Hugo Chavez, man, and Maduro, and Evo Morales, Fidel, and all these leaders that are really gung-ho for the people and everything, and really trying to pursue all that, it's really important not to disparage them, and critically support, fine, but at the same time, you got to understand the consequences of your actions as well. For those leftists that like to berate and collapse these leftist regimes.
And that's why it's so important for people to really study the science of Marxism, Leninism, of dialectical materialism, because it allows us to have the ideological understanding to see why a country like Bolivia, like a party like MAS, even though on paper it's not purely 100% full communist right now, how it's a process. And it's even reflected in their name, Movimiento al Socialismo, the movement towards socialism. And all of that comes from having a dialectical understanding that revolutions don't come about with a magical incantation. You know, people think that if you say People's War 20 times, that it suddenly becomes a perfect, you know, Maoist utopia, or that if you say, you know, or if you have the right name in your party name, I feel like people are so stuck in the world of appearances and titles, and they're like, oh, well, on their Wikipedia, it says that they're this and not that. And it's like, dude, step out of the internet, go to the real world. And that's why I really like the phrase that the Black Panthers had, which was survival pending revolution, which is exactly what you were touching on. It's like, not okay, we're going to fight for systemic changes. We understand that socialism is the only way that we're going to have better living conditions for poor and oppressed people. However, at the same time, we'll fight for and take whatever reforms we can get here and there that will immediately benefit the interests of the people, whether that's allowing small businesses, whether that's having certain credits for people. And I think it's important to keep in mind, because for the majority of people in the global South, especially Latin America, you know, countries like Bolivia, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, other places, like the norm historically has been chaos and violence. You know, people, oppressed people experience violence and poverty and chaos on a daily basis. They're tired of that. That is what capitalism does. Socialism is what brings stability, development, progress, the ability to not have to worry about your kids dying of hunger or having to be bombed. Socialism is peace. And like you said, if we need to get to a point to defend our people, we'll do it. But by all means, we're going to keep our people safe no matter what. And unfortunately, in the Western left, with people who have these ideological purity tests, as Luis Enrique says in the chat, you know, these people are just like, oh, well, they don't have, you know, pictures of guns on them all the time, and they're not waging, you know, people's war in the jungle right now, so they're fake. And I think a good example of that is looking at what's happening in India, where, like in India, for example, you have the Communist Party of India Marxists that just participated in one of the largest strikes, and they played a major role in helping organize 250 million people. Like, that's fucking big. That's a big deal. But then, like, we posted on that, for example, ANTICONQUISTA, and there were people who hit us up and they were like, you revisionists, like the Naxalites are like the real revolutionaries. Like, they're like, fuck China, like all that. What is your response, kind of pivoting a little bit more globally, right? Because this also, Latin America is within the context of global politics. What is your view of the left and its relationship to China, how it views the People's Republic of China?
It's, again, detached from reality, you know, because when we talk about, especially when we talk about sanctions, China picks up the sticks that America attempts to break. With Nicaragua in particular, I know that they've been really trying to use Nicaragua as the new canal instead of using the Panama Canal, building Nicaragua. And I know that has a lot of environmental repercussions and whatnot, and there have been huge concerns about that. But the thing is that just imagine taking away that power from the United States in the global South economically, if instead of going through Panama, you use a much better modern canal through Nicaragua, under the Sandinistas, under Ortega, through Chinese sponsorship and whatnot. And I always remember there was this video of Evo Morales even saying, you know, I really want China to be the stepping stone, have a stepping stone here as a gateway to Latin America. Bolivia is that way. And one of the reasons why Evo Morales was cooled by Tesla, basically, was because instead of giving the lithium mines to a German company, they gave it to the Chinese company, who was willing to give the indigenous people 50% of the revenue, like 50%. Whereas I think the German company was offering at most 11%. You know, and it levels out the playing field against imperialist in such a way that they're playing catch up now. And China is providing all these necessary things. For example, in that article you mentioned, they're freezing bank accounts and everything, but all over the West. And these countries really relied on these banking institutions to do these sorts of things. But China is building up a fantastic banking alternative for these countries as well, and we're going to see a huge split. I feel like we're going to see a huge split in the world pretty soon because of that, because of China and things like that. But ultimately, we are going to see, because of what China is doing and how the world is aligning between between China versus the West and everything else. We're going to see the left's true colors. We're going to see that what is the West, or what is the Western leftist really going to advocate for when the time comes? Are they going to really advocate for the global South gaining independence through relying on the China's dominant economic structure that is just growing, or a decaying capitalist structure so they can remain ideologically pure? It's so frustrating that we can plainly see how all these countries that attempt to install Marxism and socialism, they are really trying to enact these ideologies to their conditions. But in reality, when you have leftists that continue to say, no, that's not real socialism. No, where are the worker co-ops? Right up to, where's the protracted People's War? Why aren't you selling enough newspapers? Blah blah blah. Like, I mean, I can go on about why these leftist groups fail, and I think it's mainly because of their failure to grasp the conditions of the countries materialistically, and being way too committed to their ideology. I mean, we see examples all over on what happens if you take leftist ideology way too far, and how it actually works against the people. I was just talking on the Deng Xiaoping video how the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution under Mao were not really producing the results that the people needed during that time. And we can see other instances, like the Shining Path and whatnot. I know that there's some controversy down there on whether or not things are true and what happened there. But at the same time, I don't like to say Maoists either. I like to say Gonzaloists, because that's where it really came from. And they really they really taint Mao by calling themselves that. But at the same time, I do think that ultimately leftists really need to look at these countries more diligently and try to communicate to these communities in a way that doesn't, instead of an ideological pedestal, understanding their realities and trying to work with them to push towards Marxism and revolution and everything like that.
Yeah, and it also, that's a great point. And I think it's also a testament to the brilliance of the Chinese Communist Party in their ability to update and adapt based on the new conditions. I think that's something that a lot of times is lost within the left, where people view like communism as like a religion, as a static set of beliefs, where they're like, if you're a communist, that means you have to believe that, all small businesses are reactionary. But China has molded and adjusted based on the conditions. And, I just recently finished reading The Governance of China, Volume 2 by Xi Jinping. And nice. It's been really cool to read about China and the Chinese Communist Party, because first of all, we never get to hear from them in mainstream media. Like, there's this racist perception of Chinese people as they're just like these silent robots who just follow orders. And it's there and even within the left, like there's within, especially the European left, they're like, oh, they're just these brainwashed people who are in the state capitalist Chinese Communist Party. But these are like, if you read Xi Jinping, like he's a fucking genius. Like he's talking about dialectical materialism. He's talking about adjusting based on conditions. And the fact that like in 1978 with reform and opening up, like they saw what the effect of keeping your economy a certain way was. They saw what was happening in the Soviet Union. And also because of the Gang of Four, all the crazy shit that they did, the latter part of the Cultural Revolution, they needed to temporarily open up to rebuild the mode of production, to build the infrastructure. Because it's like, what are you going to redistribute if you don't have shit to redistribute? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I mean, it's just the Gang of Four was trying to really sell this concept of poor communism, trying to sell that, but the basis, like what the reformers in China were trying to push for is like, Marx even said, I'm sorry, am I frozen right now?
No, you're good.
Oh, actually,
I think
can
your
see
screen is frozen.
Yeah, I can actually see. I have to change the battery right quick. This is like an awful camera battery. Let me just change it. 1 quick second. Sorry.
It's all good. But yeah, shout out to everybody in the chat. Andres, shout out to James Graham, shout out to Rosemary, shout out to Rufus. It's really great to be able to talk about Latin America, China, and everything going on. It's all interconnected, and I think these kind of spaces are a good chance for us to really bring the left and socialism to the 21st century. We need to move out of 1960s socialism, 1970s socialism. Some people are still stuck in the 1920s socialism. You know what I'm saying? And we need to update and advance. And I'm glad to be able to talk with Comrade Barry of 415 about China and Latin America and Biden. It's all connected. Jennifer Assign says, now the CIA is rehashing the Free Tibet propaganda. Of course, they're constantly with that bullshit. Surprise. James Grant said the axis of resistance is on the rise. The West peaked in the 1970s. Finance capital was their response to the falling rate of profit. Now they are drowning in debt, decay, and corruption. That's exactly right. Babylon, the empire, is collapsing. And I compared the collapse of the U.S. empire to the collapse of a house that's rotting. It's like if you have a house that's rotting, the walls are collapsing. The Democrats are the ones who are coming in like, hey, we should paint the walls. Let's make it look more pretty. But it's like, dude, the house is fucking rotting. The structure at its root is corrupt and poor.
They're trying to save it. They're the rats. The Democrats are the rats trying to save it, while the Republicans are the termites that keep gnawing at itself, so it gets its own belly fill. And I feel like we, the people, are the ones that don't even want to live in the house anymore. We need to build something new. We want to, we know how rotten it is. And the liberals are the ones that are living in there saying, no, it's okay. It's safe, Great analogy. But going back to what I was saying about China and its opening up, I really do feel like Deng Xiaoping really said, what are you all talking about? Marxism even said, we need to be better at our productive forces and building material wealth better than capitalism, and we're not doing that if we continue this sort of unrelenting radicalism that is even impervious to rationality. I remember talking to Karl Zoff, for example, when he was saying that there was a anti-intellectual campaign going on during the Cultural Revolution and the anti-rightist campaigns, and how being intelligent was sort of an elitism that put distance between you and the people and everything. But in reality, they really shot themselves in the foot, because instead of actually putting these people that were really skilled in where they needed to be, they were out in the fields trying to learn about what it means to be a worker, and I understand the sort of, well, I understand the essence or the spirit of it, but at the same time, it's like we really do need to, when our countries are not to where the West is, we really need to put pedal to the metal and actually start building things up. And I always say, I don't like it when people say, do we need socialism with American characteristics here? It's like, no, we're so rotten that United States characteristics is something we shouldn't be advocating for. It's going to be something completely different, and it's going to be a hard pill for white people to swallow. But I think if a revolution does happen here, one form or another, there's going to be a lot of redistribution of wealth that has to happen domestically and abroad to justify all the wrong shit that we have done throughout history. It's going to be Western socialism, when it happens, because it's inevitable, is going to take, I really do feel it's going to take a different form. And obviously developing industry and whatnot, it's going to be important. But because of the exploitation that the West has relied on so much on the global South, it's going to be, man, it's really going to be a transformation to make sure that that does not happen anymore. So,
yeah, totally. And I think that's a great point about the difference in nationalism and socialism, because we can't compare nationalism in the United States, quote unquote, America, with left nationalism in a country like Bolivia or Nicaragua, because in the global South, nationalism takes a revolutionary anti-imperialist character because by default, its history, its origins were against empires like Spain, like France, like Europe. Whereas like countries like the US, like, American socialism or French socialism, these are empires that have colonized and pillaged the world. And so if there was a global socialist revolution, these empires wouldn't even exist. They wouldn't even be around, because the whole basis upon which they were founded as settler colonial governments is no longer relevant in a global socialist system. And so I think it's a good point that you make, because we have to really distinguish between global South nationalism that is more anti-imperialist and sometimes not even explicitly socialist, but is inherently anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, because it seeks to create something different. I mean, I think a good example of that is like Iran. Like I'm a communist, I'm an atheist. Iran is a Shia Islamic government and country, and we may not see completely eye to eye on certain things. But that being said, who's trading with Venezuela right now? Iran. Who's trading with Bolivia and Nicaragua and Cuba? Iran. Who's helping to make sure that these oil cargoes are going safe, that if there's any problems, Iran is, and also in Syria, it's been helping, to fight the Wahhabis, backed by the US and Saudi Arabia. So even though it's not explicitly socialist or communist, Iran is playing a progressive role in the global South as a nationalist country. And I think exactly like you said, like if it were revolution, when it does take place, I think it would be sort of the last echoes in the first world in the US and Europe, where this identity of like American and European would no longer even be relevant, because those empires would be gone. It'd be like saying like, oh, we need to maintain Prussian socialism. It's like Prussia doesn't exist anymore. That shit's not necessary.
Right. I mean, and it's good. It's good that you mentioned that sort of support that we have for places like Iran and everything else, because we know what that government does. We know what that government stands for, but at the same time, looking at its anti-imperialist role that it plays in the world, to even say that neutrality is an option when it's the U.S. versus Iran, or even I want the U.S. to win. Again, it's going back to this ultra leftism that doesn't connect with the situation that's at play, because it's not considering the people. It's not considering what happens if Iran isn't just another U.S. protectorate, what will happen there. When we look at places like Libya and Iraq, and, we can go down the list from there. Obviously, things don't, they just like war. The United States just likes war and profiting from war. And when they suck that war dry, they will leave the country out in the dust for people to do whatever they want with it. I mean, Libya is probably the huge example of what will happen when you're trying to get rid of Gaddafi. Gaddafi, I loved what Michael Parenti brought into light under Gaddafi when he was in power. It was really inspirational to see how he took care of the people and became really one of the progressive forces in Africa, in bringing a voice to socialism under his light. Obviously, there are some things that we can disagree with under there, but looking at what happened to Libya after that, it's frustrating, and it's no surprise to any communist and any Marxist-Leninist to see that what took place there, and for have leftists continuing beating these drums on China, Russia, Iran. I'm just really hoping that I really hope. I know it's kind of an unofficial sort of alliance that these anti-imperialist countries have with each other. But if we can have them to formulate their own sort of pact between each other, if the United States or the West attacks us, like kind of the same thing as NATO, but obviously a better, more protect. But I know their own sort of stances on that as well. It's sort of a we're not intervention. We're really not trying to dictate what you do with your military, country, and whatnot at the same time, because we're trying to take care of our own people here. They're on a different philosophical sort of or ideological sort of stance when it comes to their military alliances and whatnot. But we obviously kind of know when shit cuts down, what are they really going to do? And I think that's why those places are really important. Despite their government stances on things like atheism and their treatment of the LGBT community. Not to say that it's secondary. It's no way secondary. We really feel those plights and whatnot, and we really want to help those communities as well. But at the same time, we're not living in Iran right now. We can't tell people what they ought to do and what kind of, that's the same type of mentality that Western liberals have, and why that fails. So, yeah, I do agree with that stance as well.
It's like that show, South Park, where there's like Captain Hindsight or whatever, and it's like this guy comes in and he's just like, oh, you should have done this instead of that, like, oh, you should have done this, and then they're not actually like helping out to try to like fix the situation, and then they just
give each other the pat on the back,
right?
We should have done it. All right.
Great criticism of Iran on this, and it's like, okay, like what the fuck did you actually do? And it's just arrogance, man. That's the shit that pisses me off for people from the West, like, who are these armchair revolutionaries, to be like, oh, well, I don't like that they do this, so I'm not going to support them. It's just complete bullshit. But Conrad, I know we got to dip out soon, but just to finish up, I wanted to ask you, looking forward, looking to the future, what do you think is the role of anti-imperialists, socialists, communists under the Biden administration now that he's president?
Things have not changed. We're still going to be pursuing what we're pursuing. I think we should be more vocal than ever because of the amount of imperialist bullshit that they're going to try to pursue under their agenda, under the colors of liberalism, and they have the media on their side now, and there's not going to be that much scrutiny from the mainstream, but that means we have to step up our platforms, our organizing, and our movement. This is just no time to rest, and unfortunately, our movement should never rest. We need to learn that we have to be fighters here in the U.S. and around the world. We have to be fighters for the people relentlessly, and to not to obviously rest if you need to, and take your breaks if you must. Don't become fanatic. Don't become too fanatic with all this. But at the same time, we still got a lot of work to do, even with a liberal administration that continues to sweep our suffering under the rug. So I really want to push that to all organizations, all communists and comrades everywhere around the world. I believe we are winning in a very strange way. We are pushing our movement more and more, and people are noticing. But always, always, always remember, our revolution will never be televised. Our revolution will not be seen as a positive, and we have to continue fighting for what's right, reading theory, knowing what we have to do during these scenarios, be adaptable, and fight for the people no matter what.
Yo, well said, Conrad. And everybody, please make sure to go and subscribe to Conrad Bay Area 415, Marxist-Leninist Latino attorney based in Bay Area, host of the popular socialist YouTube show Comrade Report. It's also really good, and I'm happy to see other Latino communists on YouTube, because, you know, we hear about BreadTube, we hear about, I'm like, yo, we should start Tortilla Tube or Frijoles
there you go.
or Plátano Tube. I'm like, yo, let's get some more Latino, because that's the thing. Like, there's, you know, me and the comrades Anticonquista always talk about that. We're like, yo, there's 60 million Latinos in the diaspora. We're bigger than most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Imagine if we all came together to hold a strike against the U.S. government because of the sanctions on Venezuela, or in solidarity with the migrant caravan. Like, we can stop this country overnight. We have the power to do that if we come together. Like Chavez said in the beginning of the stream, you know, if we keep together, if the nations of Latin America and the global South stick together, we can bring this empire to its knees. And I think, just like you said, we have to organize, we have to build new village. Plátano Tube is going to become a reality soon. What's good? But yeah, comrade, make sure to go and subscribe. Bay Area 415, one of the realest YouTubers out there. Love speaking with you today about Latin America, intersectional imperialism. Comrade, how else can people follow you and support you?
Hey, I'm usually on Twitter every day. You can also look at my stuff on Reddit. And ultimately, I'm obviously going to keep in touch with y'all. I'll be, keep doing what I'm doing on YouTube. I also have a TikTok if y'all are interested in that, Patreon and everything else like that. But ultimately, thank you so much for having me. I'm sure we're going to continue having dialogues like this more and more. But either way, thanks, comrade.
Most of, comrade. Peace out. Have a great night. Take care. Peace out, everybody.